Lesson 5.3, solving trigonometric equations. So we've been looking at expressions. Now let's pick it up a notch and go to solving. If I want to solve, we know from way back in Algebra 1 that you always try to isolate the variable. So here it's x. I want to get x by itself. Well, first I notice there's 2x, and specifically it's 5 cosine x and 3 cosine x. The first thing I'm going to try to do is make these two x's become 1. And so the way to do that is moving these 3 cosines to the left. So when I do that, those simplify away, and this becomes 2 cosine x equals the square root of 3. Now again, as I'm trying to isolate, I would divide by 2. And so now I'm left with cosine x equals the square root of 3 divided by 2. Now, to get x by itself here, you have to take the inverse. Cosine inverse of cosine would cancel those out. And so that's what I'm going to do here, is I'm going to look for the cosine inverse of square root of 3 over 2. Now, I'll give you the answer here in a second, but this would say, if you use your hand trick, I'll do that first. I know you can't see my hand, but what you would do is you take your hand, you flip it to the back because it's inverse, and our song always goes psi y cos x, tangent is y over x. The y fingers are on top, the x are on the bottom. Cosine would have 3 fingers counting from the bottom, so you count your thumb, index finger, middle finger, and you would bend the next. So I'm bending my ring finger, and I'm seeing 3 fingers on the bottom. Flip your hand over. Now what angle is bent? What finger? Your ring finger, which represents 30 degrees. So this will be 30 degrees, or if we wanted to write it in terms of pi, it would be pi over 6. Now how you get that in your calculator over here is you would go to Add Calculator, you'd hit the trig button, and you would say cosine inverse, and we have a fraction here. It was square root of 3. Oops, square root of 3 divided by 2. When I press enter, this gives me 30 degrees because I'm in degree mode. If you're in radian mode, which you get there by if you press the settings, go to document settings, and you click here under angle, you change that to radian, make default, it would actually give you this value. Now that could be tricky because you're like, what is that in terms of pi? Well, pi is 3.14, so really you'd be saying 3.14 divided by something equals 5 point whatever. So the way you would actually do it if you solved it, since I'm telling you that these two are equal, if you just think about this, if we didn't know it was pi over 6, here's what you would do. If we were looking for this value right there, I'm sorry, I was looking for that, what would I do? Well, I can multiply this over and then divide that over. So really all I would have to do is divide pi by this answer, and it would tell me that 6 is the missing number for the denominator. So you'd go pi divided by this answer right there. When I hit enter, it tells me that it's 6. So yes, pi over 6 is in fact the angle. Okay, now having said that, these aren't the only solutions, because trig, we've learned that we can operate on the unit circle, and so cosine would give you the same value for x in multiple places. Remember, cosine, psi y, cos x. Cosine goes with x. And if x is 30 degrees, let's just think about this. That angle is 30 degrees. That means about this high up, somewhere in there, we have 30 degrees. Now this arrow, if this is referring to the actual point here, cosine would give us the same exact value because it's x. If it were down here, it would be the exact same thing. So at 30, we'd have a value, and at negative 30, we'd also have an answer. So both of these, x could equal this, and so let me just change this instead of saying or. Wow, that just totally disappeared. I'll do 30 degrees slash pi over 6. And then we learned it can also be true when we have negative 30 degrees slash negative pi over 6. Those would also be true. Now, when you look at the DOLs here, you notice how they write it. They write it in terms of pi, and there's multiple. You see this 2 pi or 2n pi? That's talking about coterminal angles. So that would just say you could keep going around the circle and ending up at this point. So the way that they would write it, if this were the DOL, is they would use the terms of pi, and they would say pi over 6 plus 2n pi, got the n, and n is just any integer. And do they use the word and or? No, just a comma. And we would say negative pi over 6 plus 2n pi. And this is always true as long as n is an integer. That's what that z means. As long as n is an integer. I'm just going to do the double z like that. So this would be your actual answer right here. Now, don't stress over this part. We'll get one thing at a time. For right now, you need to be able to find 30 degrees. So now you try this one and see. You'll only come up with one of the values. And the other one, you might have to take a little bit of practice, or you might have to come see me and ask.